of an FDA-approved agent, calcium EDTA, along with other vitamins and minerals mixed together, including high-dose vitamin C, magnesium, mixed B vitamins, in order to treat coronary artery disease. Now, people have been doing this for 50 years, and thousands, tens of thousands of people have had this therapy rendered with reporting phenomenal results with decreasing angina, decreasing claudication. Claudication is lack of blood flow to the feet. Wherever there is a need for enhanced blood flow that becomes compromised, there's an increased risk of disease and harm. You know, it was Andrew Taylor Still was a founder of osteopathic medicine. I am a board-certified family doctor. I am trained in osteopathic medicine. And it was his statement that the rule of the artery is supreme that rings true to today. You know, when this movement, osteopathic medicine, was started, it was built on the belief that the body had enormous powers to self-heal. Now, Shannon, what happens to that? You look at it.
Assuming it would heal, hopefully.
It heals, right? So the point is that the body maintains an innate capacity to heal itself. And this ties into intellectual medicine. Intellectual medicine does not reject all that is orthodox medicine. We simply approach it with skepticism. Now, skepticism is a healthy state to approach new information. But here's a problem. Skepticism met without intellectual pursuit of new knowledge and an open-mindedness to accept it leads to petrified dogma. Dogma is when you just hold on to a belief in the absence of consideration of new evidence. Folks, that's what's happening in a lot of orthodox medicine today. At intellectual medicine, we have been embraced by the population that are partaking of our treatments and gaining benefit. We have been embraced by a lot of our colleagues who are following this line of rational reasoning, following the evidence, and looking at the results. We've also been opposed by dogmatic, entrenched orthodox who feel threatened, who are unwilling to consider new information or make a reactive judgment when faced with it. Now, skepticism leads to intellectual curiosity or fear and petrified dogmatic behaviors. Intellectualism leads to enlightenment and the opportunity to live that 120 years. You know, you don't get there by doing the same stuff your mom and your granddad did. You don't get to live that healthier life by doing the same stuff that makes everybody else sick. You know, in America right now, 48% of the adolescent population is obese or overweight. Diabetes is exploding. You know, we got a notification the other day, Shannon, from the Department of Health that there was a chickenpox case up in northern Rhode Island.
I know that one.
Yeah, there's a chickenpox case. Now, look, I'm not denigrating the value of spreading that information, but why do we fall silent in the face of the number one killer, the number one epidemic in the country? And I'm talking about obesity and the surge in consequence from diabetes to cardiovascular to dementia. So today we're talking about chelation and how these things tie together. Chelation has been, well, it's been lambasted by orthodox medicine. So they finally decided, folks, so many people are getting chelation and there's so much chatter about it that they need to put a bullet in its heart. They need to do a study to prove that it wouldn't work. Thus was born the NIH multi-centered $31 million placebo-controlled study that you never heard of called the TACT Trial, the trial to assess chelation therapy. And they looked at two cohorts of people, several actually, and they gave one group chelation and another group placebo intravenous. And lo and behold, they found that chelation works, that it actually reduced complications from heart disease, diminishing heart attacks, strokes, need for revascularizing procedures like stents and bypass across the board. And it did this with nary a side effect, almost no adverse side effects. Breathtaking, isn't it? You'd expect it to be on the cover of Time magazine, wouldn't you? You would expect that this, folks, this would be the breakthrough we've been waiting for, the multi-billion-dollar, that they would rush it to the public and say, folks, get thee chelated, especially if you're a diabetic. especially for diabetics. If you're not getting chelated right now, you're depriving yourself, in our view, of enormous benefit based upon the studies and the TACT trial results. That didn't happen, though, did it, Shannon? They didn't go rushing to the news media to announce this triumph.
They bury it?
They buried it. They bury, it's like a committee in Washington. When they want to bury a bill, they send it to committee. In medicine, we send it to another study. That's awful. People are dying, and people will die. Deaths that could be prevented are proliferating because of orthodox medicine, failure to acknowledge the value of chelation. We should be doing this right now. Studies go on forever. New information comes in, and we adjust our perspective accordingly. But when you have evidence this strong to deprive the public of its access, well, that's just wrong. So we have pioneered this in Rhode Island and southern New England at Intellectual Medicine. We do chelation 6 days a week, IV therapy for the benefit of our patients. You know what? It's inexpensive, painless, quick, and there's just no reason not to chelate, especially those of you that are battling heart disease. Anybody out there is statin drugs, has had a heart attack, has had a stroke. Anybody who's a diabetic, even if you've never had a cardiovascular complication, you should be chelating right now. And to not do so deprives you of your best opportunity to live your healthiest and longest life. I can say that unequivocally. The evidence supports me. It's been buried. Furthermore, there is fear in the medical community to speak the words I'm speaking. I run the risk of consequence. I run the risk of censure. Why? Because I'm highlighting studies that orthodox medicine have buried and hidden from the public. TACT 2 is underway. This is the trial to assess chelation, Chapter 2. It only took us 10 years to get the first one done. They're still scrounging up patients for the second one. I had a gentleman come down from Boston, Shan, and he said he was going to enroll in the study until he realized that one arm of the study was a pure placebo. He said to me, how can they do that ethically? How can they take a therapy that they know works and have a study where they deprive you of its benefit? He said, I thought the study was going to refine the protocol. Maybe in the TACT trial, people receive these IVs weekly. And we have different protocols at Intellectual Medicine, both in Warwick and in East Providence. And Dr. Michael Souza has been up and running now for 3 months. He's doing a fabulous job over there, helping reverse disease, non-pharmacologically in many cases, and offering chelation therapy, not only for its cardiac benefit, but we will talk today also, if we have time today, we'll talk about your brain. If not, well, we'll be back next week. But when we come back, you'll be hearing from Howard Jardy, and he has a unique perspective. He was doing it before TACT trial ever came out. From his vantage point as a biochemist, he was able to glean its potential even back then. So we're going to be back. This is a very important show today. I hope you stay with us. Up next, we'll be talking more with Howard, a biochemist, about chelation and his own personal experience. I'll be right back. I'm Dr. Steve Petteruti. You're listening to WPRO at Intellectual Medicine. This is cornerstone therapy, folks. We live in a polluted world. Lead is every place. The need to treat our arteries is being neglected by orthodox medicine. Look, if they can't... Pardon me?
What was the Led Zeppelin song you wanted me to get at?
Rock and Roll by Led Zeppelin. It starts out with a great drum riff. It's my starting song as we come back. So the chelation trial proved to the highest standards for patients with coronary artery disease. Now, if that same level of evidence had occurred with a pill, it would be in every medicine cabinet in America right now. The fact is, this is safer than pills, folks. The IV therapies have never been shown to cause serious adverse consequence, and we've been doing it now for 4 years at Intellectual Medicine, thousands of cases, to the benefit of our patients, as you'll hear when Howard comes back. I'm going to steal my headphone thing, Shan. Thanks. That's not to mention the brain. So 85%, I'm sorry, not 85, in patients and Americans over age 85, there's a 50% risk or rate of dementia. 50%. I don't know about you folks, but I fully intend to hit 85 and beyond. 50% rate of dementia is too high. I don't want that. There's also evidence that what happens to our brain now doesn't manifest until 30 years later. So we've got to be able to connect the dots. We can't wait for our brain to start malfunctioning before we take action. We can't wait to start misplacing our keys to wonder, what can we do? Start now. If you knew that you had a 50% chance of acquiring a certain disease state, in this case dementia, and you knew you were going to hit age 85, wouldn't you take action? Rational, evidence-based action. So we're going to be talking about things you can do right now. If you have chelation near you, please get it done. And if you don't, then do what you can with what you got. And we're going to be talking about that. It's inexpensive, right? There's a line item budget in our household. If you've got average means, you can get chelated. Now, it's funny to me, Shan, how many people are zealously planning or contemplating or looking forward to their pension and their retirement as well. They should. You know, if you've worked hard, God bless you, and you've accumulated some wealth, or you've been clever enough to garner a pension that will support you in a leisure manner, that's awesome. But the thing that will corrode that is a lack of power, energy, and youthful vitality. The idea that living long has to mean getting old is false. Now, you can do both. You can chronologically age and physiologically remain young. So we started doing the telomere testing recently. We had our first patient have her test done, and she's been with us for several years, and she was happy to learn that her biological age is less than her chronologic age. That's an important detail. On a cellular level, if you can age slower than your chronologic age, that's a good thing. But it's not the only thing. Most people really don't die of old age. Most people die of preventable chronic illness, heart disease, stroke, cancer. Those are the big three. Now you put Alzheimer's disease in there. I'm going to label that as a preventative chronic disease as well.
With Dr. Petteruti. Call in now at 438-WPRO or 1-800-321-WPRO.
Yeah, baby. Time to get the lead out, people. Wake up and smell the chelation. If you are a diabetic, if you've ever had heart disease, if you've never heard of chelation, it behooves you to educate yourself. Approach it with skepticism, intellectual curiosity, and you'll be able to make your own conclusions. So as our good friend and patient Howard did, Howard, good morning, and welcome to Intellectual Medicine. Thanks for taking the time with us. Well, Howard, I'm interested, and I think our listeners would be interested in your perspective and your experience with chelation. Now, start out, if you will, just by how did you come to find us at Intellectual Medicine, and what prompted you to seek us out and consider chelation? Mm-hmm. So you were there. It was 25 years ago. This is before TACT Trial ever came out, and you started to research chelation therapy. What about, as a biochemist, what about your research in chelation led you to conclude that it might add value and then pursue treatment? Right. Yep. Right. So, Howard, for the benefit of the folks that can't hear you speaking, I'm going to be summarizing some of what you're saying. So, Howard, 25 years ago, took note of the fact that chelation, calcium EDTA, is an artificial amino acid. It's FDA approved for the removal of lead, and was developed during World War II. And they found, coincidentally, that people who were chelated for lead poisoning just weren't getting heart disease. And that led to its interest and its use for folks with heart disease or who wanted to prevent it. Over 2 million chelations later, Howard had the foresight 25 years ago to go through a cycle of chelation therapy. It's fascinating to me, Howard. It's been around for so long. For 50 years, chelation has been around. And still, we're kicking the can down the road. And then it was recently that he started to develop symptoms, diminished energy and endurance when shoveling snow. And that prompted you to seek out chelation, and you found our center. So you're picking it up from there, Howard. How did things go? That's great. So after about 10 chelation therapies, Howard, who has type 2 diabetes, was developing symptoms of exertional angina. Now, angina, folks, is when you get symptoms related to poor blood flow to the heart. Classically, we think of that as being chest pain, maybe pain going down the left arm or into the throat. But diabetics are notorious for having unusual symptoms. And chief among them is Howard, it's what you're describing. It's a decrease in stamina, in cardiovascular stamina, shortness of breath, walking up a hill, getting breathless. Now, you were able to go from running out of energy when shoveling snow to shoveling it vigorously for hours. I don't know if that's such a good thing, Howard. You're going to end up hurting your back, brother. We gotta, right? The next thing we got to do is work on back power. But no, that's happy news. Now, tell us, because you were ahead of the curve way back then, and tell us about your interpretation. You're familiar with the TACT trial, I'm guessing. The trial to assess chelation therapy, Howard, validated your experience, and it validated your interpretation of the science, where it demonstrated a 48% reduction in cardiac consequences in diabetics. That's breathtaking news when you consider that nothing has ever been shown to decrease heart attack risk. Let me phrase it this way. Controlling blood sugar alone has not been shown to have any impact on cardiac risk with regard to heart attacks and strokes in diabetics. And you know how as a diabetic they focus on your blood sugar control, and I think that's appropriate. But did you know recently they changed the target range for diabetes, Howard? They moved the goalpost. I don't know if you knew that. So they changed it. It used to be if you were a diabetic, they wanted your hemoglobin A1C, the 3-month average of blood sugar, to be 6.5. And now there's a debate in the community, should they loosen it up a little bit and have it between 7 and 8? And the rationale is that too many drugs and too many consequences from low sugar could make life less healthy for people, and that there's no great evidence that lowering it had a profound impact on stroke and heart attack. But you know what they found is when you get chelated, the stroke and heart attack risk goes down to that of a non-diabetic. That's breathtaking. Now, In your community of peers, do you know many folks with diabetes? Are people aware of chelation and its potential benefit? Yeah. You say taking calcium out of the arteries is common sense as a chemist. Tell us non-chemist how that works, because you have stuff you can teach me. And so calcium in the arteries is removed by chelation. How is that good? Mm-hmm. Chemical planing. I love that term. So, mm-hmm. Yep. So what you read, Howard, about 30 treatments leading to clean arteries was the protocol in the TACT trial. They did 30 treatments and they found this dramatic drop. We advocate for ongoing chelation even after the symptoms have resolved, because we know that there's a correlation not only between chelation and heart disease, but between lead and high blood pressure. Did you know in America, over 50 people over 50, there's a greater than half the population over 50 has hypertension. In developing countries, it's less than 5%. Where there's an environmental trigger to a lot of what ails us. And, your wisdom in seeking care is, it's a validation for you. So how's the chelation therapy been embraced by your other doctors? Are they happy you're getting it done? Oh. Right. Yeah. Well, Howard, it's been great having you talking with us. And I hope you'll be able to come back and share with us your experience and your knowledge. I know that you continue with your chelation therapy. My goal is to have you live an enriched life, not just to shovel snow, Howard, but to enjoy all aspects of healthy living. So right now, though, folks, we do need to take a break. We were listening to Howard, the biochemist. And up next from the we actually did this, Shannon, didn't we? Revolution Soft Wash.
We did.
We had our roof soft. I didn't know what the heck it was.
I didn't either. We thought it was a car wash forever.
No, they wash stuff. They wash your roof, your house. So from the Revolution Soft Wash News Center, up next, Doug Lizette with today's news. Doug, what's happening? They really do. They wash your house. It's kind of cool. I mean, whoever thought your house could be washed, right? Like your car. Well, we'll see. I haven't even seen it. Well, that was Howard Jordy, folks. And Howard is a biochemist, as you heard, and a patient of ours. And when he came to me, I love Howard. He's intellectual. He's well-read. He's a scientist. He's skeptical. And that's exactly the kind of patient we love. And he's open-minded. And that's the key ingredient. What he found with his chelation therapy, when he came to me, he was having anginal symptoms, including shortness of breath with exertion. The standard approach to that would be to give you drugs, nitroglycerin, right? Help you breathe better, and beta blockers. These drugs can help mitigate symptom, folks, but you're putting Band-Aid on a wound. It's not getting to the core. It's not getting to the cause. It's not getting to the reason. Now, Howard started chelating 25 years ago, before the science is where it is today, because he was well-read, well-researched, and as a biochemist, he knew the background to the chemical reactions that are happening in the body. And isn't it always the way that we find new evidence through observation of clinical experience? You know, Shannon, sometimes we get criticized because there's not proof that what we do works. Well, the next step in that pretzel logic is that you shouldn't do it because there's no proof. There's scientific evidence of its benefit. There are animal studies supporting benefit. There are lab studies supporting benefit. There are theoretical constructs supporting benefit. It's shown to be safe, but the proof is lacking, so you can't do it? How the heck are you ever going to do anything new with that kind of approach? It's a catch-22. You try to do something novel, and you get criticized because it's not proven. The lack of proof doesn't prove that there's no value. It just means it needs to be further developed. Now, in chelation, we have absolute proof, and it's still not embraced. So we have to deliver it. We want to deliver it, and we want to get that message out loud and clear. More people can be benefiting from this. The resistance from orthodox medicine is unethical. For an orthodox cardiologist to tell a patient you should not chelate is unethical in our view. The studies support the value. There is no downside risk that is yet to be established. And oh, by the way, while you're chelating your body to help your arteries and your heart and your angina, you're going to get collateral benefit to every other organ in the body. I can't think of an organ that doesn't require blood flow. Can you? I mean, isn't this basic logic? 20% of every beat of your heart goes to your brain. 20% goes to your kidney. 20% goes to your liver. 3 organs account for 60% of your blood flow. And that's before we get to your bones, your muscles, and all those other vital organs. Yes, including genitalia, ladies and gentlemen. The rule of the artery is supreme. That which helps your artery helps your total health. It also carries immune function to your body. Does chelation prevent cancer? There is no evidence proving that it does, but let's follow the bouncing ball. Chelation rids the body or diminishes the load of toxic known carcinogens. Cadmium is a known carcinogen. Chelation moves it out. Lead is a known neurotoxin. Chelation moves it out. Aluminum, a known neurotoxin. Magnesium, a known neurotoxin. So now we have a single procedure that's inexpensive, that's safe, that can be performed on most anybody, that has been proven to diminish cardiovascular risk, has a mechanism of action that we would expect to have value with regard to global blood flow, as well as neuroprotection. Protect the brain, protect blood flow. What brings nourishment to the cells? It's your capillaries, folks, little tiny, tiny blood vessels. Now, Howard, the biochemist, was talking about stripping away calcium load in the arteries, and he's right. However, the theory about chelation with regard to vascular health goes to capillaries, those little tiny, tiny arteries, the microscopic ones. Remember from the television shows, you'd see the capillary and the little blood, a single red blood cell moving through a capillary where the cells can now suck out the oxygen and nourishment that's flowing through that capillary at a slow rate, one red cell at a time. That little tiny capillary is very vulnerable to being choked off. And when that happens, you don't notice it. You don't notice it until a whole bunch of them have been choked off. Well, if we know that the arteries are the conduit of healthy living, then it behooves us to do stuff to keep them healthy. Chelation is a cornerstone piece of that. I do chelation every month, and I started a couple of years ago. No heart disease, but the science is compelling. What Howard talked about, the soldiers in World War II being chelated on a regular basis, very compelling. I had to talk to my guy here, Tyler. Hey, Tyler, if you can summarize Maria from Providence's question for me, I may be able to answer it on air because I've got kind of a full agenda, and if I can't, then I'll answer it off air afterward.
20 seconds left. She's old and she's having a lot of problems sleeping. She hasn't slept at all the past 3 nights.
Okay, let her know that we may have time to answer it on air, and if not, we'll answer it off air later.
Sounds good. You're once we're back, I'll let her know.
Okay.
Now, back to Intellectual Medicine with Dr. Petteruti. Call in now at 438 WPRO.
We can talk about hormones.
Wait, you're back.
I know. We are back. It is Dr. Steve Petteruti here along with Shannon. We are at Intellectual Medicine with Tyler doing a brilliant job behind the glass. Tyler, how are you feeling today, brother? You're a stud. Hey, Tyler, we want you to read a propaganda piece for us. You don't mind, do you, right? And if you don't do it, you might be fired. How does that feel, Tyler? Not so good, would it? Look. Well, what I'm talking about, and those of you that are following the news know, by the way, we're going to talk about Howard and Chelation, but I got to put in a plug for the Providence Journal and for WPRO people. This is your source of unfiltered news. It's your source. You know, a free press is critical to the democracy, and a free press needs your support. You know, the internet is beautiful, but I subscribe to the Journal Bulletin, even though they piss me off a lot of the time. But it's our free press. Now, I was disturbed, Shannon, that Sinclair Media forced many of these hosts on WJR, the news reporters, to read an editorial piece as under threat of consequence.
Yeah, I mean, so many of them.
Yeah, have a separate editorial thing, but people trust these anchors. You know, you've come to trust our information. Well, we can't be. Can we be fired?
I'm sure we can be fired.
We can be fired
for this. How can they really fire us?
That's what the point is.
They could discontinue our service.
They could discontinue. They could, but I give a lot of credit to those heroic reporters that historically have risked themselves. Well, maybe because we sympathize with it. That's what we do, Shannon. Every week on Intellectual Medicine, we risk ourselves to be out here to talk to you about our truth. But some good things are happening out there in the state of Rhode Island. I'm really pleased that they're putting forth a bond, $1 billion to rebuild our schools. Come on, folks, right? What's that old cliche? If you think education is expensive, try ignorance. You cannot teach, you cannot love your children in a crappy building. It sends a message that they don't matter. So let's get out there and get behind rebuilding our schools. I was very happy to learn that the state is going to reject the bribe from the marijuana shops. The $5 million, we'll give you money if you don't let competition come into our state. Come on, just between
$5 million.
$5 million, that's right. They have that kind of cash on hand. Some exciting news, Shannon, out of West Greenwich and North Kingston. There's a 36 megawatt solar field planned for West Greenwich and a 32 megawatt solar field planned for North Kingston. Now, this is great, but it highlights a detail. In order to get those approved, you have to get local support. How come those poor son of a guns in Burrillville get the smog, polluting, carcinogenic factory jammed down their throat and they have no power over it? Meanwhile, in North Kingston, you get a couple of solar panels and, so not that you ought to eliminate local input, but we should amplify it when it comes to oil. Why do we favor oil over solar in a manner that can be imposed on us without our willingness to accept it? Choke the oil at its source. Let them threaten us with rolling brownouts. You know, the day after a rolling brownout, Shannon, there will be an explosion of alternative fuel that will clean up our air. And this stuff matters. And it matters because our health is at stake. Our quality of life is at stake. Our economy is at stake. Clean air and clean water sell. You want to see Rhode Island's economy go in the tank? Yeah, try polluting Narragansett Bay any further. That clean bay drives the economy. $1 billion worth of tourism dollars pouring into Rhode Island. Clean energy would generate revenue for the state. You put a solar field in Rhode Island, that's money that's not coming out of the shale from the Midwest or the oil derricks in Galveston, right? There's money coming back to Rhode Island. How great is that? I don't know. I think we should do more of it. We tried to get Bluestone recently. I thought it was fascinating.
It really was.
You realize people that they are not getting Bluestone from America very much. They're importing it from China because we're blowing our Bluestone up to suck natural gas and oil out of the ground. The idea that a natural gas furnace, or I should say a power source, is fabulous is ridiculous. They're getting it by fracking the Midwest, polluting the table water. It's just, everything connects, people. Everything connects. And in intellectual medicine, we connect the dots. So chelate, please, if you didn't hear Howard, a biochemist getting chelation was having shortness of breath, on exertion, couldn't shovel snow, 10 chelations later, feels like King Kong. And he's only getting better. We'll have him back, Shan, because he recently enrolled in other elements of intellectual medicine where we not only do chelation, but we will solve your obesity problem. This, folks, is one of the foundation pieces of living long. The 120-year lifespan, the 120-year youth span is built on these foundations. Live at your best weight. A recent study found, a quote, and I quote, overwhelming evidence from the New England Journal of Medicine that being overweight increases your risk of death from heart disease and cancer. This notion that you can be fit but fat, that still comes with a 28% increased risk of heart disease. Now, we're not disparaging exercise for the obese. Obviously, being fit is always an attribute. However, being lean is critical, but you can't get there on your own. Diet and exercise fails for most people. And if your doctor looks you in the eye and tells you, you know, you really ought to lose some weight. Duh. You mean I haven't thought of that? Gee, maybe you should diet and exercise. Any doctor dispensing diet and exercise for a patient that needs to lose more than 5% of their body weight is manifesting their ignorance and potentially exposing their bias. Now, why is it that the number one cause of premature death and disability in America today, the number one metabolic disorder, the number one thing that every primary care doctor is going to see in their office on Monday gets utterly ignored by orthodox medicine? It's a willful ignorance. It's a lack of ambition to try to seek out and treat this condition. Intellectual medicine solves that problem. We're not completely alone. I mean, there are other doctors that have an enlightened attitude toward this, and I welcome them. I welcome them to the pursuit, and we're here to serve those patients. A Yale study showed that over 50% of doctors, Shannon, you would imagine doctors would be empathic and that they would be sympathetic toward their patients. Folks, I have time. I got to tell the story. How much time do I have back there, Tyler? I got 3 minutes. So there I was, Shannon, in my medical school days, and I was working with, this is a hard story for me to tell. I was working with an endocrinologist in this small town in Georgia, small city in Columbus, Georgia. Now, there are not many endocrinologists. Those are doctors who treat diabetes. And as a medical student, you got to stand there with your mouth shut, your eyes open, your ears open, your hands by your side. You got to be like a wooden Indian, right? Because you're there just to learn and observe in the private doctor's office. So this poor woman, she's sitting there, and he looked at her. He said, you've gained 4 pounds. I told you to lose weight. And she looked at him and said, Doctor, I'm trying. I told you to lose weight, he sternly said to her. And finally he said, you're lying to me. You can't stop eating. He leans back in his chair, looks out the open door to his secretary and says, give her records. She's not coming back. She's out of my practice. The woman was broken down to tears, leaving that. I stood there, Shannon. I was shocked. I couldn't say a word. You can't. I was like those poor WJR posts that were forced. But it made a mark. That was over 30 years ago. And I think it molded me to find a solution to the obesity problem. And it disturbed me that, as evidenced by this Yale study, over 50% of doctors described obese patients as awkward, ugly, unattractive, and non-compliant. That, folks, coming from physicians and healthcare people. A study from the Journal of Internal Medicine found an inverse correlation between body mass index and obesity. Body mass index and respect generated by the doctor toward the patient. Now, this is not universal. Unfortunately, it is widespread, and it is not changing. How can you engage and treat a condition when you are biased toward the patient who possesses it, when you believe it's a failure of character and not the complex metabolic disorder that it is? You must engage. You have to treat properly. And when we come back, we're going to talk some elements about that. We're going to talk about vitamin D and its critical nature in helping fight cancer. Well, there's a study that shows that, folks. We'll be right back. I'm Dr. Petteruti. This is Intellectual Medicine. So that, folks, always leaves me verklempt, but for good reason. You know, that painful, painful moment. And I'll never forget it. Seeing that woman, terrible. That doctor, so arrogant. And he was so pompous. And he was so rigid. And he was so wrong. And I knew then, as a medical student with scant experience, that his intellectual conclusions were false. That he was operating out of his own pre-established dogma, smug in his comfort with the knowledge he had, and unwilling to accept the potential that he might be wrong, that he might be misjudging that woman, that he might be lacking in knowledge, right? That's a little bit compelling. You know, in intellectual medicine, we seek out ways to help patients that are having trouble being helped elsewhere. And that includes the patients who just flat out want to stay healthy. You know, one of the consults I love the most are when people come to me and say, Doc, I just want what you're doing. I'm in. I just want to stay young. Age is a disease process that is modifiable and reversible. Age itself, what we perceive as a consequence of aging, shrinking, lost muscle mass, diminished intellectual capacity, growing adiposity, are all treatable. To the extent that that has failed to be acknowledged by others in medicine is a failure on their part of intellectual curiosity and an ongoing pursuit or an ongoing manifestation of willful ignorance. This is hard. I don't deny that. It's taken us thousands of hours of study, years of experience to arrive where we are. But we share that. Dr. Michael Souza embraces that over in East Providence. The same capacity to reverse obesity, to reverse heart disease with chelation exists in his center. So we push on. And I went from that experience and I walked away from it being affected. And then I went into the military and I saw it again and again and again. You listen to your patients and they will tell you what's going on. And when they tell you a story that you can't figure out, you must then research and pursue the answer, right? Lyme disease is now recognized as a diagnosable and treatable medical disorder. How would you like to be the patient with Lyme disease before they knew what it was? And you go to your doctor and you say, you know, my brain's not working right. My muscles ache everywhere. I'm tired. I feel depressed. And the doctor did blood work back in the 1980s, 1990s before Lyme was discovered and said, I'm sorry, you're fine. There's nothing wrong with you. The tests are all normal. Tests are all normal does not mean nothing is wrong. It means they just don't have the ability to find it. You end up on the psychiatrist's couch talking about your Lyme symptoms. And then eureka, it gets discovered and treated and things get better. Now, I'm not suggesting that psychiatrists have no role in medicine. But boy, you better go cautiously if your doctor is stumped by your symptoms. And the number one contributor to ill health is aging. So we tie all these things together. That's the art of intellectual medicine, is looking at these different pathways. You've got obesity. You've got heart disease. Why are we sitting around content to give statin drugs and call it a day when it comes to heart disease? When it's an epidemic, it's unique to developed nations. It doesn't happen in other settings. And what about cancer prevention? You know, isn't it interesting, Shannon? It's like a third rail. When you talk about cancer in medicine, doctors whisper in the hallways. They're afraid to speak out loud. They're afraid that they're going to be fired from their job. You know, I have doctors in positions in oncology. We're down to a minute. Yeah.
No.
Oh, we're on. We're on.
Call in now at 438-WPRO or 1-800-321-WPRO.
Hey, we're back. I'm Dr. Petteruti. This is Intellectual Medicine. Here I am along with Shannon. And we were just talking about dogma. We're talking about bias and prejudice. rigidity. And I was telling the story of that awful endocrinologist and his attitude towards a patient. Smug, arrogant, totally comforted in your fund of knowledge is no way to go through life. Right, Dean Wormer? Right? Remember Animal House, Shannon? You don't remember Animal House?
No.
Oh,
no.
Oh, people help her out.
Like
that classic line. Tyler's smiling. You remember that? Oh, he looks at Flounder and what do you say? Fat, stupid, and drunk is no way to go through life, young man. I'd say rigid, arrogant, and dogmatic is no way to go through life. And some of my colleagues have that temperament. And when you try to talk about something outside the box, holy cow. You know, I could tell you, Shannon, some of our colleagues in Orthodox medicine are devastatingly curious, are intellectually curious. They're afraid of getting fired if they start to really think about or talk about this. When I send communication to my oncological colleagues, when we're giving vitamin C to support patients fighting cancer, people turtle up. They're afraid not of the vitamin C, not of the science, not of its potential merit. They're afraid of consequence from orthodoxy, that you're off the reservation. You're talking about things that are prohibited. It is forbidden. You know, thou shalt not. We must open our minds. So drugs and weight loss, you know, this is another area. The right use of pharmacology can be an invaluable asset in helping people lose weight. A recent study showed that drugs and weight loss lowered blood sugar, lowered waist circumference, and had no negative impact on blood pressure or heart rate. Why are we so scared of them? It's because of dogma. Overwhelming evidence that obesity accelerates disease states. Now we have to turn our attention to your brain. Oh, what we do. I did say we talk about vitamin D, didn't I? Mm-hmm. And I have a bad habit of doing this, of saying I'm gonna tell the audience about something and then getting distracted. So vitamin D. Look, and here's another. So signs your doctor is not embracing the spirit of intellectual medicine. Number one, your doctor tells you to diet and exercise. Number two, you ask your doctor what he thinks about chelation, and he or she says either, what's chelation, or it doesn't work, don't do it, it's dangerous. Now, the enlightened approach is a doctor says, I'm not familiar with it, I'll look into it, let's talk about it next time. That's an doctor who's embracing an intellectual spirit. When it comes to vitamins, another sign your doctor is settling into the current fund of knowledge. Have you ever heard this one, Shannon? You take your supplements, what do you get? Expensive urine.
Oh, cringe.
That's a nice global whitewash to tell you that you're kind of ignorant, that the research you've been doing on your own is hollow, but that their lack of knowledge is superior. So they did a study, Shannon. This is very important, folks. Pull up your chair. The British Medical Journal, major Orthodox journal, March of 2018, quote, results support the hypothesis that vitamin D might have beneficial effect for cancer prevention. They found that with increasing blood levels of vitamin D, there were decreasing cancer rates. And this correlates with the science regarding, vitamin D is less a vitamin. It acts more like a hormone or an enzyme, and it has a wide array of effect on the human body. One of its effects is to ensure accurate cell division. It has an anti-proliferative effect. That means it prevents reproduction of colon, breast, and prostate cancer cells. Should vitamin D be a part of your cancer support activity when you're being treated for cancer? When we do vitamin D levels on our cancer patients, it's shocking how low they are. I've seen vitamin D levels in the single digits, folks, in the teens. Now, even your Orthodox physician is going to endorse having it above 30 nanogram per deciliter. We advocate it should be as high as 70. If you can't get there orally, often you need IV infusions of vitamin D. No harm in getting your vitamin D level properly elevated to prevent cancer. The evidence is tilting in that direction. Absolute proof for some of these things will never satisfy the pure cynics, Shannon. Never. They'll go to their grave believing it has no value. It's incumbent upon you, dear listener, to look at the research, British Medical Journal, and do your own judgment. Now, we're not going to have time today to talk about your brain and how to protect it, but we should make this a top priority, next week. There are studies correlating obesity with accelerated brain aging. One study showed that obese patients had a brain that was 10 years older than their lean cohort. So this is about the time, isn't it, Chen? We see a lot of people come to us for weight loss. I wonder why that is.
Well, if it ever stops snowing here in Rhode Island.
well, I think part of that is because they've already been to the weight loss program, right? The diet and exercise program, which fails 100% of the time. You'll lose weight, you'll regain it. And we have our success built on the hardest patients to treat, the hardest, the people that have been through everything else. So I encourage you, if you're battling the weight issue, it's not diet and exercise. I encourage you, if you have heart disease or a family history, really just about everybody should consider chelation. In our mind, the only issue is how often. Now, I'm going to leave you, though, with another piece of information. Chlorpyrifos. Can you say that? Chlorpyrifos. Chlorpyrifos is an organophosphate insecticide. I mentioned it because Tony DeJesus is coming up next. And I love Tony. He's a beautiful guy and been a great resource of information for Rhode Islanders. And he tries to be so balanced. But folks, if you've got insecticides at home, what are you doing? Get rid of those neurotoxins and let the pros do it. The organophosphate insecticides were developed as nerve gas agents during World War II. They cause brain damage, people. Brain damage. So much to talk about, Shannon. We need a longer show. What do you think? No? No, anyhow. Folks, it's great talking to you every week. I'm Dr. Steve Petteruti, Intellectual Medicine, wishing you 120 youthful years. See you next week. Well, busy show today. We talked about chelation, an invaluable resource to protect your heart and your arteries. Can't emphasize it enough, folks. And we talked about brain. No, we didn't talk about enough about brain. We'll talk about it next week. I'm going to tell you next week how to keep your brain from getting demented. In the meantime, take your vitamin D, stay young, and we'll see you next week.